Welcome to Pod of Jake, a podcast hosted by Jake. You can go to 0xDESIGNER.com to learn more about Jake and everything that he does, and feel free to email him anytime at jake@blogofjake.com or message him at 0xJake on Twitter or at Jake on Warpcast. Anyway, we thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy this episode. If you do, please consider giving Pod of Jake a 5-star review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. We appreciate your support.
Thank you, 0xDESIGNER, for joining me on the podcast today. I appreciate you taking the time, and I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while. Just a quick little background. You are a career designer, been doing it for over 10 years, and more recently, over the last few years, have delved deep into doing things in crypto, posting a lot of things on chain, mostly designs, and it's interesting. You've sort of carved out this little niche for yourself where I feel like you are posting. Sometimes it's kind of like a funny thing, but most of the time it's like a genuinely good idea that would be like great to either add to a product that you're riffing on or create a new product around. Just good ideas for things to do that are possible with crypto, many of which were not really possible pre-crypto. And so for that reason, I feel like you are, not just a designer, even if that's sort of like your, career or whatever, but more of like sort of a futurist. And I actually came up, I had this term come to mind as I was thinking, like I put like a title just as notes for myself for how to introduce guests. And I put this word like Imagineer. And I knew I wasn't like creating that word, but I didn't actually know what it was from. And so I Googled it, and it's like Disney, and it's like an engineer slash like artist slash like all of these good things that I feel like it's actually a really fitting title. I don't know how it resonates with you, but anyway, appreciate you taking the time, and looking forward to the conversation. And I think the best place to get started would be for those who don't know you, if you could sort of give a little bit of your story from as early as you're willing to start to where you are today, talking through some of the decisions you made along the way. And I know you're pseudonymous, so feel free to leave out or include whatever you want, but just to give people a bit of context.
Yeah, that was a really great and honestly flattering intro. I definitely see myself as more of like a futurist, and design is just the medium or like the vehicle for articulating, thoughts and ideas. Imagineer I feel unworthy of that, because I think that sometimes the concepts that I put out can be funny, but other times they're just like marginal improvements to existing products. And also sometimes they are pretty grand, and just trying to imagine like what the world looks like when we just assume that everyone's using it and how much better things can get. So I guess in a way that is like more, I don't know, Imagineer. That's a cool title. I'm gonna think about that.
What's the one in your profile just before, not to front run the story, but you've got in your bio like provocateur. Like, what does that mean to you?
Well, there's like a technical label for the types of designs that I put out. And in like the design world, they're known as design provocations, which are just like fake app ideas, fake features, basically conceptual mock-ups to sort of influence a direction rather than be something that is like actually implementable. And I've had provocateur as my bio for like a few months now. I feel like I am never satisfied with the way I describe myself on Twitter. It's really hard.
Yeah.
So that's just like my lazy description.
Yeah, the more the more words that you add, it's interesting because you say like you don't like it. Not the word that you chose, but the general, like it's tough to figure out what to do with the description. I felt the same. Part of it is because I feel like I don't really like labels. Like I think it's so silly when there's like articles about people and it's like, so and so, the founder of X, or like so and so, Y profession or whatever. And it's just like people are just distilled down to like literally a one word descriptor or like a two-word descriptor. But at the same time, it's also putting provocateur is like, hopefully I'm pronouncing that at least somewhat reasonably, but like it's one word is the most broad descriptor you can have. I feel like as you add more words, you are describing something more specifically. And so like if you have like a big long bio, suddenly it's like even more labeling. Whereas if you just have like sort of the one word, it's like very vague, but like gives some people an idea. Or in my case, since I didn't really even know what that means, it doesn't really give me any idea. And so it sort of serves the same purpose roughly as having nothing in your bio, which is something I don't know where I'm at now. I forget what I have, but I've certainly operated probably half my time on Twitter. I've had like no bio just because similarly to you, I think
It's
I just
hard.
don't really, yeah, I just don't really like it.
Well, what's funny is that generally speaking, like for most of my career, I've struggled with that, like a label for the type of work, because I think design is a bastardized term. I think when you think about design, for most people, the first thought that comes to mind is like interior designer or graphic designer. People ask me to make logos all the time, and like I can make a decent logo. I can make a good logo, but I'm not great. Like I'm not a great graphic designer. I can translate a lot of product design skills and make logos and stuff. But even the term like UX is so ambiguous. Like my parents still have no idea what my work is, what it's like. I just, for all they know, I just like sit at my computer all day, and it's hard to describe too. And so I've tried to find like other metaphors like that throughout my career for the type of like software, specifically the software design work that I've been doing. And the one metaphor that comes up that resonates the most with people that like don't work in tech, and even people that work in tech just don't work on product, is like architect, and not that as a label, but just like as part of the process of creating things. Like you think about how you build a building, just generally speaking. There's like the urban planners that figure out how to use like a piece of real estate, like a piece of earth, and then um, once the use or like the zoning is decided, and you sort of like set the strategy for what this piece of land is going to be used for, then the architects come in and they like determine what the facade looks like, what materials you use, um, what the hallways and doors and how each space is intended to be used. But the architect never actually builds the building. Like the architect hands off the blueprints to the contractors, the general contractors. Those are the guys that hit hammer to nail. And so like I've used that metaphor so often to describe the type of work that I do. And that one seems to resonate, but even there's no like direct label. If I say UX, the only people that understand what UX is are people that work on software. And so yeah, this has been a struggle. I think
Yeah.
in an interesting way, not in a bad way. I
Yeah.
kind of like the ambiguity of it.
I think that the harder it is to describe what you do, all things considered, the sort of more likely that is to be something that is unique to you, because it's easy to fall into or onto like a beaten path, go down like a established track, and those tracks have names by default. And granted, like UX has a name, and also some of these names become, to your point, like I think you said, like design or designer is like sort of like bastardized. Some of these words are kind of bad labels. And so like a designer ends up taking on like a very specific meaning within like the tech space that's
Right.
like not, that it's not really actually like what the word is in the most general sense. And so anyway, I have if I notice that I'm doing something or with other people, like the harder it is actually to describe what they're doing, I think the better that is, the more likely it is to be novel, the more likely it is to be something unique to themselves, or at least closer to unique to themselves than, something that's like very established path, which I just think is more fun and more interesting. Nothing against the established paths. But yeah, and I think design, it's a word that I have an interesting relationship with, I would say, because I like to think that I have a reasonably good like sort of eye for design and sense of design, but I've never like studied it or anything. I have no, training or anything. And so that might sound like, arrogant or something to certain people. But I don't say that about all things. Like I will tell you, or tell anyone, very clearly, like, I have like horrible like retention. Like I'm fine to, describe my weaknesses as well. Like I read a book and I don't really remember anything about it. Or like various things that I'm just like not strong. I have a horrific sense of direction. I'll walk into a hotel and forget which way the elevator is. But design, I just feel like I have like a bit of a knack for it. And I think there are these specific areas of design. The more into them you get, the more, further down the rabbit hole you could probably get, like learning all of the principles and various, you know, formal like sort of things within that area. But design, I feel like it really zooms out like incredibly far. Like there's a few of like the highest level things that I feel like maybe in the category of like soft skills, design is something that's more of like a hard skill, but I think of like some of the, like the highest level things to that are most important in terms of just like skills, I guess. And I think of decision making, and that's both like that ranges the spectrum from like a very intentional, very thoughtfully made decision to what people probably more characterize as like judgment, like the everyday decisions, like having good judgment, just the things that you don't even think that they're decisions. You're just constantly using judgment, basically. You're making thousands of however many decisions, way more than that probably per day. So like that's something that just like touches everything. Another thing is communication. Like you're always communicating, writing, talking, whatever. And so like that's how you engage with the outer with other people. And so like communication is this like super high level thing. And I actually think of design as it's I think it's in that category where very few things are. Like I don't have a fourth thing to name. And I think it might even be in a way above communication to some extent. And this is, people like sort of have different interpretations for words, so this is just like my interpretation, but um I think communication in a way is one application of design. Um I don't know how you feel, if you feel any way about that.
No, I agree. I think you're spot on. Like design, broadly speaking, is just doing anything with intention. Like design is like being thoughtful. And I know this sounds so abstracted. Um, and I'll just reinforce your interpretation and your description with an example. Like the best part of Uber's design isn't the interface. They were pretty good at like pioneering a mobile app, like a software product that looked really sleek and futuristic. They were using like lots of neutral colors, really intentional with like shadows. Um, everything was really convenient. Like you open the app and the first input or the first thing that you see is just like the input of the address that you're going. But and like there's so many like visual components of the Uber experience, especially as they were like sort of pioneering the category for ride sharing. But that's not even the best design aspect of like Uber's UX. I think the best design for Uber is the ability to get in a car and get out and not have to think about payment. It's so in that sense, in that example, the designed experience for ride sharing is actually invisible. You can't see it. And to me, that's like the ultimate example of how design isn't necessarily always visual. And, you could reframe that for crypto and think about, okay, how are we designing crypto? It's not just good branding. It's not like good color choices or, that sort of thing. And I think a lot of people in the space sort of misconstrue design and look to build out design capabilities on their teams thinking that way. Whereas like there's a lot of crypto. I mean, this is also a very commonly used phrase, but like a lot of crypto can be abstracted away. And in that process, like that is a design process of, like you said, the decision making aspects of what parts of the wallet experience, what part of the block explorer experience, what part of the transaction screen do you abstract away. Sometimes it's all of it. Sometimes the crypto component is completely invisible. Like Blackbird's a good example of that. And other times, for meme coin trading, you have to be thoughtful and intentional about surfacing as much information as possible to make a trade as quickly, as cheap, as efficiently as possible. So like these are all design decisions. And again, just to reinforce the idea, they're not always visual.
Yeah, it's I like the way you put it as more of like a designing of the experience, and it makes me think like what I was saying earlier with decision making, communication, and design being like three of these top level things, and like communication maybe falling under design. Decision making, I mean, I don't know, when I'm working on something, I feel like the core decisions are all design decisions ultimately. They're not visual design decisions to your point, but it's like, how does this work? Um,
Yeah, exactly.
and so it's all, and not to say that like all decisions necessarily are, fall under design, but um, it's just a super powerful thing. So I guess as you specialize in UX, have you always been in terms of your like sort of life and as it's been intertwined with design, has it always been a UX focus for you, or how did it start?
How did it start? Well, I studied econ and psych, so my undergrad was like generally a focus and interest on behavioral sciences. So I'm not like a properly trained designer, and I think that kind of comes through in the way that I'm describing it right now. And yeah, first job was like a corporate desk job doing spreadsheet stuff, and
So how
then
did you actually learn?
started making websites for friends, and then that turned into like a web design business. And then I realized, as I started to learn more on the job technically, that there was like a very clear distinction in the process between this type of design that you do before the login screen and the type of design that you do after the login screen. The before the login screen is more of the communication stuff that you mentioned. So it's more about just like communicating the value proposition, increasing desirability, increasing the motivation to like convert. That's a completely different process, a different way of thinking, a different way of creating. And then after the login screen, it's like, okay, you've established the value proposition. How do you reduce the friction as much as possible for somebody to extract it? And that's always been more interesting for me. So yeah, it sort of started with like web design, more subjective thinking into like more of the science behind how you make something easy to use. A lot of like research-based methods, user testing, rapid prototyping, iterating. And so just over the course of the years of doing that, like in an independent capacity, just sort of like honed in on that way of thinking, on that skill set, on that process.
Are there any are there like a few core resources that you feel like helped establish your um sort of core principles the most? Like I know you've talked about this designer from Apple. Um, are there others or specific resources or specific people or even brands that are like core for you?
Like that shaped me, or well, I guess we're kind of one of the same. I was going to ask like the resources that helped me hone the craft, or resources that I give to other people who want to learn how to. But they're kind
Um,
of they're
they
kind of the
should
same.
be similar, but whichever, yeah, whatever you want to answer, basically.
I used to go to a lot of conferences uh, run by this OG experience design firm or consultancy called Adaptive Path. This was like early 2010s. And it was there, like I was just paying out of pocket, like to show up to these conferences and just like watch every single talk about things like journey mapping. And so that was pivotal. Just learning about like these strategic design artifacts that sort of map out a journey where you can pinpoint in like this visual way and build empathy for how somebody's like feeling in a particular part of the journey. That was, I think, really formative. And then the holy grail, in my opinion, for just design UX thinking in like a like generally, not just even in software, is the design of everyday things by Don Norman. where he essentially just roots every single, pragmatic design technique into like cognitive science. And so again, this is just like the thing that I've always been naturally drawn to. It's like, what's the science behind well-designed things, as opposed to this like artistic, subjective, rub your chin kind of process.
Mhm.
So that's like the one book that was extremely formative. I read it twice. Design of Everyday Things.
That's great. And the first thing you mentioned was that was like a, at the time in-person sync thing, like people can't, that would be one reason I guess why, to your point, like what influenced you the most could be different than what you recommend. People can't necessarily participate in that anymore. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say because the time where I was learning or like getting like acquiring these more practical tactical skills, the whole landscape looked differently. Like Figma didn't exist. And it was like Sketch and InVision. And I know like if any design nerds are listening, like that just seems so archaic at this point.
True.
And now we're at the point where like I don't even know if this is a good thing, but if you're working on a big design team, the design tools for software design work has now created the process where you just have these established components. Like a button is a button, you can't change it. A card is a card. Like a picture or an image should be presented this way. And design is more like Lego blocks. And I think there's an argument to be made about why that's a good thing, because then you think more about the intention, you think more about like the outcome rather than how it looks. But I know it frustrates a lot of designers because, a lot of people are drawn to the trade because of the expectation of it being like a creative role. In
Hmm.
a lot of ways it is, but I think over time it's just become so standardized. Um, where like the things that I'm mentioning, like journey mapping and like understanding the cognitive science behind design decisions becomes even more valuable.
Yeah, when I guess when I was asking for the resources as well, I was sort of assuming some like that the core things would also be somewhat timeless, but they can also be in the context of their time, like that maybe they're not, especially if they're like referring to various resources or whatever, various like tools at the time that are not the ones that you would use anymore. Um, when like, we've gone back and forth like a little bit, just on text, or in Warpcast DMs, and it seems to me that and just even talking now, listening to you on podcasts, it seems that you have like a pretty objective perspective on maybe not all like elements of design, but like a lot of them, where there is like a correct and an incorrect and like a better way to do things, or a certain way that certain things should be done, which sounds similar almost to this what you're talking about with like the button is the button and the image should be shown this way, and there are just certain ways to do certain things. Is there any like tension between that, however you determined like sort of right and wrong or best practice in a given context, versus like a desire to just do something that doesn't follow the rule, or abide by like the objective correct, just to sort of like see what happens? Or is it like these Lego blocks that you're building upon, you feel pretty confident that they just kind of are what they are, and like they shouldn't actually be tweaked too much, if that makes sense?
Are you asking if there's any benefit to breaking design rules?
Basically.
Yeah, I think there's, it's a really good question. And I'm realizing that when I'm describing the constraints for designers as time has gone on, as the tech industry has matured, the rules that are being created are both universal rules and also rules that each product team has to generate. Like you have to create a pattern that everyone can expect. And I use this example often where like everyone knows where the shopping cart is on a web page. So if I asked you like where do you expect to find the shopping cart, what would you say?
Top right.
Have you ever not seen it there?
Not that I can think of, no.
Okay, well, there have been a few instances, this is years back, where I've seen experimental websites try to play around with that. And it's so frustrating. Like I end up abandoning whatever I'm trying to buy because nothing is where I expect to find it. And like that's the perfect example of like a universal design pattern that is hard to break and you shouldn't break, especially because it has, if there's a shopping cart on an app or on a website, that is the primary driver of like the business revenue. So you can't mess with that. And that's like a good example of a universal design pattern that there's absolutely no advantage to breaking, unless it's like a art piece or like something like that. And then on a team by team basis, there's patterns that create consistency that equally are just the consistency and like the constraints are intended to create comfort and familiarity for the user. And I don't know if you remember this, but I think it was like 2016, like mid 2010s, maybe even later, like 2018. I can't remember for sure. But Snapchat completely redesigned the app with a new navigation pattern where they started using like the swipe left for chat, or like swipe towards the left for chat, swipe towards the right for like stories, and then the center was the camera. And they reported like a 50% decrease in users. And at this point, they were a publicly traded company, so it just like tanked their stock. It was a disaster. And so again, like for software, the way, like by definition, something being intuitive is something that matches your expectations. And so there are like rules that you can break, but if it changes the placement or the positioning of where generally people expect things to be, it's disastrous. Now, I don't know. I can't think of any like specific examples where you can break out of those universal rules for software in general, universal rules for specific products, where like more creativity is better. I'm sure there are some examples, but I think this is probably like a really good opportunity to say that that's why I've enjoyed making content for the last 2 years, is because, I've been so measured about design, working with like teams that are shipping software. And now here's this opportunity for me to just like do whatever I want. And it's not even necessarily designing interface components creatively. Sometimes it is, but it's often just like every day I have this opportunity to be creative about like I guess like what the outcome of a product should be, and to try to be creative about how to communicate it so that you can imagine yourself using it. So I think that's what's been so satisfying about the content series, the Design Every Days, is that it is like in a lot of ways a purely creative act that, and most product designers don't get that opportunity.
Yeah, it's interesting. It reminds me of like you talked about like most designers, like they're sort of attracted to it because it seems creative, and then you get there and it's like not so creative. It reminds me of like people who are attracted to becoming like veterinarians because they love animals, and then their job is like pretty like awful in terms of like having to take care of like hurt animals and put down dogs and stuff like this. It's like this counterintuitive thing that attracts people who are sort of like, it's actually design attracts these creatives and then constrains the creativity in some sense, at least it sounds like. Um, so you mentioned, design every days. For people who don't have context, you've been doing this for over 500 days now, coming up on 2 years, and you basically produce these, elements sort of as you've described, or these like visuals, and people can mint them on chain. You're also just like tweeting them out. And, people who, haven't seen these, you can roughly think of it as like sort of like an iPhone screen with an app open and some design that you've made, showing the function on the app with a title that sort of describes it or whatever. Um, and one of the things that, first of all, it's great to hear. I didn't understand from afar that that would have been some huge creative unlock for you, versus your day to day of being a designer. But it's cool to hear that it has been that for you. And it was interesting for me to learn, in preparing for this, that you typically, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you sort of, in addition to producing one of these every day, you are actually creating one of these every day. You're not like creating in batches and then, scheduling them out or something, or stocking them up and then posting them out. And you're also not even like not only are you not executing on them in batches, but you're not really even like thinking of them in batches. Like it would seem to be something that you sort of get waves where it's like you think of one and that like sort of bounces into like six or seven others that are sort of tangential. And then like, okay, like you've got like a week's worth there. And then you might not have another burst for like 3 days. But is this something where like you're actually like sort of sitting at the desk? Like maybe you can just like sort of go behind the scenes of like what this looks like in most cases on a lot of days and what is sort of like maybe an outlier situation of a story behind one of these things, but just how these come to be. Because I think, we were talking a little bit before recording that it's just so hard. Most people don't do something every day, especially not something creative. That's like the big differentiator. I feel like working out every day, good discipline and everything, but like that's just like discipline. It's not like creative energy required. But something like, creating a piece of art or writing or producing a creative design is really hard. And also you're, I don't know if it's helpful or hurtful, but you're constrained to basically crypto as sort of your arena for coming up with these ideas, which sort of precede the actual doing of the work of the design. You have to actually think of the thing. So yeah, maybe you can sort of like bring us behind the scenes a little bit on what that looks like for you.
Yeah, wow, there's really a lot to pull from there. I think the things that and maybe you can hold me accountable to this, but the things that I want to touch on that are like how I do it every day, but then also why crypto. I think that's a really interesting thing to dig in that I don't know that I've really expressed publicly, like why I'm still using crypto as a constraint as opposed to quote unquote pivoting to AI.
Right.
But first, let me start by describing the daily process. I think it's hearing you describe it that way makes it feel more grand than it actually feels for me. I think there's like some signs that it takes 30 days to form a habit. And like the first, I don't know, few months of doing it on a daily basis were challenging, but it was so exciting. I think the motivation early on was that I was carving out a space for myself and contributing to this whole industry, like via the Twitter feed, and that there was like an appetite for this content. So there was just something, admittedly, and I'm being kind of vulnerable here, but there's something admittedly exciting about this feeling that, oh, there's actually something that I can offer here. There's something that I can say. There's something that I can do that resonates with people. And so that was, for the first few months, like very motivating. It was exciting to get up every day and be like, okay, how can I contribute to the conversation here? Because up until that point, I wasn't like, I didn't even have a Twitter until the like late 2021. And then I kind of stopped tweeting in 2022. Then the market tanked and I don't know, everything kind of was in shambles by mid 22, end of 23. And so part of it for me was like I had such high conviction in crypto at this point. I was so inspired by these potential use cases for NFTs specifically, not even just like the PFPs or like the community forming artifacts, but like digital art, collectibles. There's so much creativity. Like today, I was just thinking to myself, I was remembering this art collection. I don't even know if it was art blocks, but it was like this floral work, this digital flower that blossomed every time you traded it. I'm like, man, that was like a creative renaissance for people trying to figure out how to create art using and leveraging tokenization. And it was just like so mind blowing for me. And then, the value of everything sort of crumbled. And I had bought and collected a lot of things and hadn't sold any of it because I was just so excited about it and had high conviction. So part of what also motivated me to start was just a reminder for why crypto is so exciting, because I could feel that waning. And naturally, I think a lot of other people did, because all the activity in the space sort of fizzled out. And so for me, it was just like a reminder as to what I was so excited about. I hadn't been excited about anything like that in so long, maybe even ever. And so anyway, fast forward like a few months into creating these like design provocations every day. At this point, it's just become a habit. It's actually harder to stop than it is to continue. So, yeah, like every day I wake up, have a coffee, scroll the timeline, open up my wallet, just find something to do, and then just try to be like hyper aware of something that I'm struggling with or some frustrating point. Admittedly, between you and I, and everyone listening, I guess, it's gotten a lot harder because the UX of all the things that we're using these days now, like the wallet experience, has significantly improved. So there's like a lot less things to think about redesigning. And the same applies for the awareness that I have for things in everyday life outside of crypto. It's like, I think one of my favorite designs, which I published over a year ago, was during the process of trying to rent a new apartment. And there was, anyone who's ever rented an apartment knows how ridiculous it is to share such personal and sensitive information over email. Like, you have to share your social security number, your tax forms, your bank statements, like over email to some agent that you have no idea what they're doing with all this information. So it's definitely like not secure. And I was like, oh, crypto can solve this. So yeah, part of the process every day is to just live, and then go through my experience online, my experience on the blockchain, my experience away from my computer, with an awareness of how it can be better, or how crypto can make it better.
Yeah, I want to. Well, I feel like you asked to hold accountable, so I want to. You mentioned like sort of the everyday, how you do what you do every day, and then the why crypto. Do you feel that that more or less covered that ground, or did you have anything to add to either of those?
Yeah, for the most part, I think it's just because I'm so excited about the possibilities. And I was talking to another crypto founder a couple weeks ago in Singapore, who was like, "Yeah, your stuff's great. It's really inspiring. The problem is that it assumes that everyone's using crypto, and that's a bad assumption." I think he referenced some YC term that was like, it's like the tar pit phenomenon, where the least successful companies that try to build on the assumption of something that doesn't already exist is like uh, almost guarantees like the failure of a startup. And sometimes I kind of feel that way, where like in the rent application example, it assumes that everybody has their data on the blockchain, and that they can verify that they make a certain amount of money, or that they're like not a criminal, or that they're a US citizen, or that they're employed, without actually sharing what that information is. And so like that assumption makes it difficult. But um, it's still exciting. I don't know. Like the value proposition is so high, in my opinion, that it feels like that's still inevitable. And the good thing is I don't have to actually execute on it. So, over a long enough time horizon, it feels like we'll figure it out. So I don't have to worry about surviving as a startup.
Right. And there's a few different directions I could go, but what when you first invested in crypto, I understand it was like 2017 or something like that, and you just sort of got some, I don't know, Bitcoin, maybe some Ethereum, and like pretty standard, and like put it away, and you had like this like 20 or 30-year time horizon. You're like, oh, that's super interesting, and it's going to take forever to be meaningful. So I'm gonna, just stash it away and forget about it. And like you almost literally did for like 3 or 4 years. And then 2021 seems to have like sort of caught your attention, like the next hype cycle, NFTs. digital collectibles, things like that. And at some point you decided or just ended up uh, operating crypto, like before the design every days, you became, fascinated by this stuff. Was there something like in particular that made you start? Because you're talking about now too, how like, the assumption that people are actually in crypto may be false. Like there's actually it's pretty small. And so originally you seem to have had this idea that this was like a very long-term thing going to take a very long time to have a lot of people or a lot of value. And then at some point, it seems like you might have changed your mind to like, this is actually worth spending time on now, because it's like interesting now, not just like later. Is that something that there was like a particular thing or a particular moment in time, or do you sort of get what I'm getting at
Yeah,
there?
yeah, yeah. And I have a very clear answer for like what that moment was. Because early 2010s, mid 2010s, the promise of crypto was to fix the financial system, and it was purely a financial product. But then in 2021, there was so much attention that was being driven towards NFTs for various reasons. And um, to me, that was just such an eye-opening experience of like the tokenization of everything and the benefits and value of doing that. That was a moment where I was like, oh, I can work on this. And this is the part of crypto that makes contact with everyday life. This is the part of crypto that can change like even some of the things that I'm working on. Like it can change the product experience. That if you hold this token, that you can get a completely different interface or a completely different UX. Or that if markets form around ideas, like it wasn't just about money, cross-border payments, and that sort of thing. That was the moment where I was like, oh, this isn't just like an investment thing. This is there are products that you can build on top of this that are better than Web two.
Yeah, it's interesting too with a lot of your designs. Like I wonder this with your designs. I also wonder with Soren Iverson, who was previously on the podcast as well. And I think you guys started like similar timing maybe in sort of what you're doing. You're basically two of two in this category that I'm aware of. And yours is crypto and his is a little more. I think he at least intends it for it to be a little bit more like humorous, but I actually think a lot of them are like kind of genius, like really good ideas that actually should be built. But for both of you guys, like a good percentage of these designs, some of them are features for existing products, others are things that could be, built new from scratch, and still others are maybe features that could be built into existing products. But if they weren't, someone else could also go and like build those from scratch. And have you ever thought about like, obviously you're tweeting these out, you're putting them available for people to mint. Um, have you thought about putting more, like doing anything differently to try to make that connection easier for people? And it's not like almost working on the experience of that, like narrowing, closing the gap between these designs that you're putting out and the possibility that they may actually sort of like come to fruition.
Yeah, eventually I want to make something and not just post pictures. That's my aspiration. I think um oh, man, this is such a hard question. Or at least such a hard thing to talk about. Like, when are you gonna make something? I get that question often.
No, I mean, you can take that if it's interesting to think about or talk about, but I actually wasn't even suggesting that. I was suggesting that somehow you can, like the most impactful thing for you to do may well be to do exactly what you're doing, but also somehow maybe it's not even on you, but like just somehow these ideas, you're not just putting it like some people just put out ideas, and arguably for certain people that's the best thing that they could be doing, because like if they were actually trying to like work on something, it would be like sort of a waste of their time. They're like, it's sort of like a meme, but like some people actually just have like phenomenal ideas, and like their time is best spent like thinking about and sharing those. And then yours is, another layer on top of that, which is you're actually showing the design for these things. Like you have the ideas, and they're practical, and you're showing the design for how they could actually be built. And then all it requires is like, someone to actually go build them, which is like seemingly like the least difficult part. I mean, it's hard obviously to like build a product or a company from scratch, but like um a good number of it is sort of just like, or a good amount of it is just acting on it. And so like I think there's an argument to be made that what you're doing is like a higher leverage point, if that makes sense. But I'm just wondering, like, crypto, given all these like designs you're always thinking about these things to do in crypto, like are there incentive mechanisms, maybe like ways to set things up that people may be incentivized to build your designs? I don't know. I don't have a specific idea. I'm just wondering if you've ever thought about things in that category where not necessarily like you have to build it, but your ideas might come to fruition more often, materialize more often.
Yeah, they don't necessarily have to come to fruition. I think what I've realized, and the reason I'm still going, is because I think you're right. It is a higher leverage thing to put these ideas out in a way that are highly legible every day. And what I've learned is that it's the body of work that matters and not each specific idea. And so I've seen some individual ideas get implemented. Sometimes I'm credited for it. But ultimately, what I'm trying to optimize for right now, at least at this stage in my life, is impact. And yeah, there's been several days where I'm like, can I make more of an impact by actually making a product, like making the thing that I want to see or that I want to use, or just continuing to push the envelope of what good design looks like in the space. And the reason I say that the body of work is more important is because I think that for whatever reason, like the content, like the designs that I put out, sometimes they get a lot of views. And I think when that happens, it's just an indication that you know, it's less about like, is this a good design and do people like it? And more of like, are people craving good design? And is this just a representation of it? And in some way, shape, or form, it feels like I'm trying to help raise the bar for what good design is. Like just trying to get design into the conversation, just trying to get people to be more thoughtful. And oftentimes it's really satisfying because my improved, like there's like a noticeably improved experience for myself, just having more product leaders in the space prioritize design, think more of with like a consumer mindset and from that perspective. And so it is one day at a time. I don't know if I need to necessarily incentivize people to like build the individual ideas, but I think there's this fit. I don't want to say product market fit, but it's like content market fit for this appetite for better designed UX in crypto. And then these artifacts that I put out that just broadly represent better designed UX in crypto. And so I feel like the more I'm just pummeling that message, the more it just like creates propaganda, the higher the bar is for design in the space. And that feels like the right place to be right now.
Right. And not even necessarily like, aesthetics or specific like UX things, but also to our conversation earlier, just sort of like ideas that you can communicate through the design as your medium. It's as if you're writing blog posts basically about certain things that you'd like to see, and you're just communicating them differently in ways that frankly are probably more enjoyable for most people than reading a blog post, or at least quicker to
Yeah, it's
understand.
quicker.
And and so you can also not only inject like more design into the conversation, but like one example from you is like a lot of your every days are like ideas related to interoperability or demonstrating the potential for interoperability in crypto, which I understand you think is, one of the most interesting things, if not the most interesting thing that crypto does. I tend to agree with you. And there's like, it feels so underutilized. And so if and as you continue to show examples of it, whether or not people are applying those exact examples with their products or creating companies that, include those like sort of that interoperability, you're not only injecting design in the conversation, but into like sort of the conversation around crypto, but like you're also injecting interoperability and like any other sort of things that you want to inject through the design beyond the design itself.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Like zooming out, it's just propaganda. Like each individual idea, some might be more valuable than the other, but it's really just a constant reinforcement of like, hey, there are non-financial use cases, and this needs to be easier to use.
Do you have any, speaking to earlier, like, potentially wanting to build something at some point, obviously like not holding yourself to any obligation or anything, but I'm just sort of curious if there's any ideas, whether from your design everydays or otherwise, that have stood out among, the hundreds that have sort of like bubbled up again and again over time, or is it not that there's not so clearly like one or two or a few of those, and it's more of like just depth than some that sort of stand out?
I don't think there's a specific idea that's worth pursuing, even if it continues to bubble up. Because I think if I've learned anything about startups in general, not just design, it's that whatever you start with is, and the point in which there's traction or it becomes successful, if it ever becomes successful, requires multiple pivots, multiple iterations. And so I think I'm more in love with the process of like trying to figure out what that is. Like everyone needs a starting point, and a starting point has to have high conviction. But ultimately, if you can use Zora as the example. When Zora first launched, it looked nothing like it looks today, and Zora today looks nothing like it looked a year ago. So I think part of the appeal for me is to just like, have control and be on that journey in some way, because I think that's the thing that is so exciting. I think that's part of the thing that design sort of trains you for, of thinking that way. It's like everything you put out is just a vehicle for feedback, and then you act on that feedback marginally, incrementally over time. And after enough time, the thing looks completely different. So I could speak to the things that are top of mind for me, the designs that are most interesting. But ultimately, I know that if anybody tries to build a company from any of these designs, that by the time it becomes useful, by the time it has substance, by the time it's meaningful, it's going to look nothing like the original idea.
Right. You mentioned Zora. I know we're coming up on time here, but I'd mentioned it before we started the recording, and we said maybe we would talk about it. I think the general point was basically it's a pretty hot, there's not that many crypto apps that you use every day. I think correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I heard you say somewhere or tweet somewhere like you're doing less in crypto than you were previously at certain points. And I think that's true for a lot of people. Just given, the excitement of like sort of the bull runs and everything, when prices are up, everyone's feeling good, got money to spend, whatever. Um, but I will say that over the last like couple of years, uh, Warpcast, previously Farcaster, has become the first crypto app that I'm using multiple times daily ever. Um, like mobile app at least. And besides wallets, I guess, which even that I'm not really using my wallets daily necessarily either. Or if I am, maybe it's partly due to Farcaster now or Warpcast. But the other one that sort of recently came online that, it's always hard to like you said, it's like 30 days to make a habit. I'm probably like roughly at like 30 days or 50 days or something on this one, but the Zora app came out pretty recently, and it's roughly, if Warpcast, Zora is to Instagram as Warpcast is to Twitter, very roughly. So Warpcast started as like a Twitter clone, and then sort of over a year plus started to have all these things that you could do that you can't do on Twitter. And it actually became, it started off as like a worse Twitter clone, and then it became, Twitter Plus, where there's all these other stuff. And it's at some point, to your point, actually, it's not really going to probably even resemble Twitter that much anymore. And Zora similarly is starting from a place of like Instagram, which I think is a great place to start. I got my brother, who's never done anything in crypto except for hold some Bitcoin and Ethereum, to download the Zora app, and he's using it every day and posting and minting and loving it. It's just like natural for him. It's easy. So it's crazy. It's hard to overcome that threshold though of creating a crypto product that's actually someone wants to use every day, at least for people like me who like don't use a ton of different apps every day. So I'm curious your experience with uh, like everyday usage of apps that have sort of like surpassed that threshold for you, if there were some in the past that fell off, just your general sort of usage of crypto products personally, as and it sounds like, I mean, that's a huge part of your process as well, as like you said, like, engaging with all of these apps and being aware of what the pain points are, what you would like to see differently, stuff like that. You sort of need to have products to use in order to inform your everyday practice.
Oh yeah, there's definitely a high correlation between the amount that I'm using crypto things and the confidence that I have in the design content that I'm putting out. And the Zora experience in particular, I wonder if your brother is so comfortable with it because it feels so familiar. It feels like Instagram in many ways. And I think there's a lot of good to that. But yeah, I mean, you clearly have an affinity for it too. It's probably really useful for you to reflect and maybe talk about your experience, why you think that's drawn you to the app every day. Because there's still this overarching question around the mint meta, the open editions thing, that why does anyone mint? I mean, I do it every day and I don't even really know why I mint. So that's probably a better question for you to answer that can be really insightful for me, but also for Zora, for anyone building like any product in the space. Like what's drawing you to doing and using it every day?
Yeah, I think it's similar to my brother actually, which is that it's familiar. I don't use Instagram anymore, but I did certainly in the early days for, at least a few years. And I used Twitter more recently over the last few years. And so the move from Twitter to Warpcast, the way that I did it was cross-posting from Twitter to Warpcast for, or at the time it was Farcaster. And I would just literally copy paste. And I was like, I'm already saying this thing, I might as well say it on this other platform as well. And because I was generally interested, I believe that sufficiently decentralized social platforms are worth having, all that. That was like the reason to get on. But the reason I'm on now, I don't really think about like, oh yeah, I'm here because it's decentralized. It's just like it's a good community and you can do more with a crypto social app than you can on Twitter. So like over time, it sort of won me over increasingly. But the reason I started and was able to develop the habit was because it was easy and it was familiar and it was a template that I already had a groove in my brain for what a tweet looks like. And that's to start, at least that was what a cast was for me. And then so similarly with Zora, even though I haven't used Instagram in years, I sort of get the gist. You take a picture, you post a picture, you like pictures, and the only difference here is you take a picture, you post a picture, or you make a design, you post it, and instead of liking people's things, you're minting people's things. And I generally just like mint one, and I mint as if it's a like button, as if it costs nothing, because it more or less does. It's like a quarter. I mean, to be fair, that does add up, but basically, since joining the platform, I've got enough mints on my stuff that the sparks, which is like the native currency, basically like small units of Ethereum. Um, the sparks, I'm adding sparks more than I'm spending them, even when I'm minting one at a time freely, and then occasionally I'll mint 11 as like a love button almost. And I'm very similar to you. I don't really know why I'm minting other than that I like or that I love, and it's just It's more, it's just basically a like or a love button, and it's because there's money attached to it, it's becomes more of like a patronage thing. But in a way, liking someone's comment or liking someone's tweet or Instagram or whatever, that already was somewhat of a patronage thing. You're giving them, a tiny dose of like whatever it is, endorsement or whatever, instead of money. And so it's like a similar thing. And I'm excited, like, if Zora turns into like TikTok or whatever, like Instagram has, or just taking pictures of like it's just people all the time and like, how much fun we're having, then like I'll be less into it. But for now, it's more like the early Instagram where it's like people are just taking photos of whatever they think is worth taking a photo of and they're posting it. And like that's kind of cool and kind of fun. And like it's not like, oh, you're posting too often. It's like, oh, we'll just post stuff whenever you want. And so I like it. It feels just like an early Instagram. And it's driven me to take more photos. And I think taking more photos is good because um, it's interesting. Like you were talking about, you have more awareness using crypto products or any products for that matter. When I was writing every day and publishing a blog post every day, I just had a generally higher sense of awareness for interesting things, thoughts, or things that I sort of like saw in the world that could be expanded into blog posts. And similarly, like if you use Twitter a lot, you find that like naturally things just sort of like pop up as like, oh, that's like a tweet. And I didn't, prior to Zora, since Instagram, really have like a mental groove for like, I should take a picture of that. Maybe a little bit just to like have them on my phone, but not like, oh, that's a good photo that's a good photo that could be worth posting. And now I have that. And it's kind of nice to just have a slightly greater appreciation for your environment, like the things around you in the world, things to take photos of. And they're not all photos either. Sometimes they're like designed. So I'll sometimes think of like, an amateur thing that I want to mock up a design of myself, and then I'll post it on Zora. So it increases my creativity, I would say, and my awareness of the world around me, things that would be interesting to take a photo of and post. And it's just fun to mint people. And I feel like I can sort of, um, be a curator because people follow me and then they see what I mint and then they'll follow on my mint and I can actually earn for that. So if you mint something and then more than 5 people mint it after you, you actually like sort of break even on the cost that you took to mint it in the first place. So I guess to answer the question of like why I mint, like you, it's sort of ambiguous, but in general, it's like it's not costing me a fortune. If anything, it seems to be sort of like a positive something where it's actually like sort of working favorable for me is if I just keep posting and sort of minting freely. And I think a lot of people operating in crypto just sort of like give benefit of the doubt to the idea that like being active will be beneficial in the long run, even though no one knows exactly how that's going to happen, and maybe it won't happen. Um, Certainly there's like different reads of this. Like people are like actively farming airdrops. I've never really like explicitly done stuff like that. Nothing against it. Like, if you can make money that way, like go for it. But it's more of like a less intentional, less direct intentional. Like, for example, I'm not posting on Farcaster because I'm expecting some like Farcaster airdrop, but I'd be pretty surprised if, casting as much as I do on Farcaster in the long run doesn't pay like pretty significant dividends. And I just really don't know like how. I mean, for now, it's like there was like degen came along and there's like Moxie and like there's all these things that just like sort of sprout up that you make some money here and there for doing things that you were doing anyway. Um, so I don't know. I don't feel a need to predict them, but maybe I don't know if that's like sort of a useful perspective. But and the other reason I shouldn't ignore is I have been, fortunate to be in touch with Jacob over the last few months, and to know the founder of something is also like a huge driver. It's obviously not something that can like scale incredibly well, but um, Zora's like, it's been in the space for a while. They've gone through a bunch of iterations. Like you said, they've been successful at multiple of those iterations. I like their aesthetic. There's a lot, there's a lot of reasons, I guess. And it just goes to show why it's very hard to overcome that daily usage threshold. And so for me, it's Warpcast and Zora so far. And hopefully out of all of the apps that I use every day, more of them are either crypto first or integrating crypto over time, because like you, I think there's a lot of upside for the internet if and as things become, more interoperable. And there's just a ton of exciting experiments to be run that it feels like it's still super early.
Yeah, I think one of the main insights that I'm hearing from you describing your experience on Farcaster and Zora is that you're gravitating towards the social experiences. And I think that's an underexplored design space for sure. Even though some of the value proposition for it right now is financial, I think there's a lot of social capital that in like an emergent way that can form over time. And I don't think anybody really knows what it is. And I think, Zora's doing a great job of experimenting and trying to figure out what it is. But you mentioned curation. I think that's a status game that's worth playing on these crypto apps when you collect things. I also really believe that even though it doesn't make sense for the things that we're collecting now, like nobody who's actually, this is false. Most people that are collecting in volume on Zora are doing it for speculation. But I think there's probably a few hundred of us, like the internet social circles that you and I are both in, where we're just doing it for fun without any expectation of financial upside to this thing that we're collecting for a quarter. But over time, it's like the body of work that you've collected that sort of generates this interest graph. There's no product experience that fully leverages it right now. I think there's an opportunity to do that, where you create a social platform that presents you to other people based on the things that you've done on chain and the things that you've collected. So I think the dots will connect looking back, and it sounds like you're thinking about it the same way.
Yeah, I do. I like what you're saying there too about like you're sort of like not sure what the right way to say it is, but you're almost like putting yourself on the internet more and more the more that you're doing on chain because this is like publicly legible stuff. And so like you're like almost training like if there's going to be something that, for example, is saying like, okay, here's everything that you've done and here's, a restaurant you might like or a piece of art that you might like to collect or someone who you could be a friend, good friend with, or it's a dating app that's like, I mean, if there was like it's probably not a good joke, but it's like there's not that many girls in crypto is basically what I was getting at. But there's all these sorts of things where it's like it could take all of these inputs, and the more inputs you give it, just the better the model is basically going to be. And so maybe that's a part of it as well. It's like it's not just financial, and it's not even just because you like it or whatever, but it's also, maybe subconsciously, or maybe it's not even a part of it at all, and it's just sort of a convenient element that will likely become true, which is that the more I am casting and minting and following and whatever else you can sort of do on trading and whatever that you can do on chain, the more some, the more it's the like AI or whatever is going to be able to like sort of read the data and tell me something useful to me. And there's a negative way to look at that too, which is like, the more advertisers are going to be able to like take advantage of me or something, which is not great to think about. But the best advertisement for you to see is actually something that's super useful. Like it's, ads have a bad rep of being like annoying, but an advertisement could like change your life in a certain way, like an advertisement for a life-changing product for you. And so you do want those things to like target you, if that makes sense. So anyway, I know we're like up and plenty over on time, but been an awesome conversation. Hopefully, more in the future. But appreciate you taking the time again. And is there anything else that we left out that you might like to mention on the way out, or if not, just where do you want to sort of send people who are interested in digging in more? There's designeverydays.com. You're at 0xDESIGNER on Twitter and Warpcast. Is there anywhere else?
Oh, just those things.
Awesome. And anything else on your part or all good?
We covered a lot of ground, actually.
Great. Well, again, really appreciate it. Awesome conversation and look forward to keeping in touch.
Likewise. Thanks for having me on.